session. Here we go. So basically, before we begin, I just want to give you all an overview of this webinar. We will begin with an introduction to the ISO system, which I will give. And followed by this, we will look in detail at international workshop agreements, exploring a little bit what these deliverables are, and also how you can undertake a process for adopting these deliverables. Then we will look in more detail at the IWA 29 on professional farmer organizations. Followed by this, we will have a presentation on from the International Finance Corporation perspective on this document. And then we will have two more cases of Peru's experience with this new document and Honduras's as well. We will finish the session with a question and answers where you, as I mentioned just a moment ago, we would ask you to please include your questions in the Q&A box. So before we begin, though, I would like to just quickly launch a poll to get a sense of the types of participants that we have today, where you come from in the world. So I would very much appreciate if you could quickly take the time to respond to this poll and let us know where you're from. Just a few more seconds. Okay, great. So as you can all see, the majority of you come from Europe and Central Asia, followed by Latin America, and we have some colleagues from North America and Sub-Saharan Africa and so on. So thank you very much for participating in this poll. And there will be a few more, so we hope this session will be interactive and that you will be able to enjoy it. So without further ado, I want to speak to you a bit today about the ISO system. You may not be familiar with it, or you may be familiar with it, but I think it would be good to just go over the basics. ISO is a global network. It's a membership-based organization with 165 members in countries around the world. The job is to make international standards, and there is a vast portfolio of 23,000 standards so far that are available in all sorts of technical sectors. There's a central secretariat that is in Geneva with a staff of about 160 people. And the role of the central secretariat is to coordinate the ISO system, but I will go in a little bit more detail on this shortly. And as I mentioned before, there's a lot of different technical sectors, and there are 300 plus different sectors in the ISO system, which you can see on the ISO website. And there are roughly 100 standards under development every month. So it's quite an active and quite a vast system. So if it's possible to explain in more detail, there are three main elements to the ISO system. As I mentioned before, there's the ISO Central Secretariat, which is the coordinating, if you want, the coordinating arm of ISO, which is housed in Geneva. And followed by this, there's the ISO members, as I mentioned before, the 165 members in the network. And there's a set of experts that collaborate, that work in the ISO system to develop standards. And the experts develop these standards in a working group there are different working groups under each of the different technical sectors in the ISO system. So as I mentioned before, the experts write the standards, and they are nominated by members.
We have some problem with interpretation. Maybe you can assign the Lilian Gentile as an interpretation, please.
Oh, I apologize. One moment, please. I do not see Ms. Gentile in the list, I'm afraid.
It's in the answer and questions chat.
I'm not sure what I can do here. It's she must not have joined as an interpreter. Apologies for this technical issue.
I'm sorry, we are just on it. I resend the link, so she's trying to connect.
Okay, thank you all very much. Apologies, and thank you for your patience. Please advise when it's possible to start again. We apologize for this technical issue. Not really sure. I hope that we're able to solve it. Okay, I see that one of our interpreters has joined. Allow me to just quickly.
Ok. Ahí me está poniendo, ¿eh?
Here we are.
Perfecto. Yo ya estoy.
Okay, everyone, thank you again for your patience and apologies. These are what happens nowadays with this new technology. Unfortunately, it's not always smooth, but in any case, I hope that now it is working and that you're able to follow. For those that are not able to follow in English, you can follow in Spanish or in French. So as I was mentioning before, I would just like to return to my presentation now and just basically explain a little bit more about the ISO system before we move on to our different panelists. So just one moment, please. Okay. Thanks again very much for your patience. So in essence, as I was explaining, the ISO system is composed of three parts. In essence, there's the central secretariat, which is based in Geneva, that manages the work of coordination of the whole system. There's the 165 members that participate in the ISO system. And then there are the experts, the people who actually write the standards. They are nominated by members in the different countries, but they can also come from international organizations such as the UN or other key players. The members represent ISO in their countries, and their role is to approve standards and circulate them amongst their national stakeholders to get a consensus position. So when a new document is developed by a working group, it is once the experts have approved the document and there's consensus, the document then moves up into the committee at the level of the national standards bodies, and then the bodies will then disseminate the standard amongst the different stakeholders and obtain a position, and then they will vote. And another thing that members can do, and it's not ISO as in the central secretariat in Geneva that decides, the members can propose new standards, new fields of work, and so on. So they're very much part of the ISO system. The ISO system is the members. And so what does the central secretariat do? So essentially we facilitate participation in the process. We provide a platform for experts to get together. We provide also the information technology, so the voting platforms where people can vote on different standards. And we also provide some coordination on the standards development process. We have some assigned technical program managers that oversee each of the different technical sectors in the ISO system and accompany the development of standards throughout the entire process. But I've spoken a lot about international standards, thinking that maybe everyone was aware of what they were and how they, how they operated. So essentially, for those of you who don't know, international standards are a document and they represent a global consensus. They can be on virtually any number of topic. The important thing is that the standard is written by experts, and they need to first agree that a certain topic represents the state of the art. It represents what it's let's say the best way of doing something, or of creating a product, a service, and so on. And so it can contain requirements, so ways that you must do something, ways that you must do something in order to achieve a certain result. They can contain specifications on how to develop a product. They can provide guidelines to just help to navigate a certain issue. And of course, they're also applicable to services and so on. The idea being that once the experts agree, then the document is felt to be robust, and then it can move on to the different stage where the different members will approve it. So I mentioned international standards. There are other deliverables in the ISO system, and today this is what this webinar is about. And for instance, there are technical specifications, as you can see on the screen, publicly available specifications, technical reports. Today, we're talking about international workshop agreements, so one type of ISO deliverable. And all of this is available on our website. You can find out more if you're interested. But each one of these deliverables follows a different development route. So for instance, today, as you can see at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, this document that we're talking about today is an international workshop agreement, and it follows a workshop route. So in essence, it was developed during a workshop, but you'll hear more about it from the other speakers today. So before I give the floor, I just want to introduce our next speaker. His name is Mr. Jose Alcorta, and he works in the ISO Central Secretariat. A couple of words about Jose. He began his career in 2011 as the head of the technical group responsible for quality, environment, energy, finance, and management system standards. Since 2018, he's the head of standardization and supervises all the standardization activities in ISO Central Secretariat. He has also led projects to support the UN Sustainable Development Goals by creating a portion of the website dedicated to the SDGs and the tool that connects the standards with them. You may have seen this. It's a very good tool that will tell you how many standards and what standards are applicable to each of the SDGs. Jose is responsible for ISO quality, environment, governance, circular economy, information technology committees, as well as groups on management system standards and climate change. And now I'm happy to give you the floor, Jose. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Welcome to everybody to the IWA workshop. If we move into the next slide, I'm going to talk about what are international workshop agreements and how these are implemented by member bodies, the ISO members that Francesco referred to. So this is the definition taken from the ISO IC directives. ISO IC directives is basically the document that ISO and its sister organization for the electrotechnical standards follow in terms of the process and the governance of the technical committee work. So the definition of an international workshop agreement is an international workshop agreement, IWA, is a document developed outside the normal ISO committee system to enable market players, stakeholders, to negotiate in an open workshop environment. These IWAs are typically administratively supported by a member body. This means that although they are not developed within a committee, one of the 165 ISO members takes the responsibility to run the secretariat so that they bring consistency and alignment to those ISO rules to bring them again into parity with the rest of the ISO documents that we published. If we move to the next slide, please. Why are IWAs unique? Well, as I mentioned, they are outside the formal committee process, which is, as we know, an average of 3 years to develop a formal standard, because there is a comprehensive system of steps to ensure that consensus happens in all those different phases of drafting, checking with the mineral committees, public inquiry, etc. They open to external stakeholders, which means that if you compare to the to the ISO committees, they are formed by member bodies who appoint national delegates and experts. This is open to anybody that is interested in participating. It is a flexible process, not following the strict rules of development of the formal standards. And it's a simple template for the drafting, and again, doesn't need to comply to the complicated ISO drafting rules for formal standards. We list the participants of that event in the document, which is unusual because normally a formal standard would just make reference to the technical committee, and in there we mention the member bodies who are responsible for that work, but not individual persons. It is still a normative document. That's the beauty of it. It means that as a normative document, it can contain requirements and be prescriptive. However, because of this unusual system and flexible approach that we take, we give it a life of 7 years so that it evolves into something more formal within a technical committee. That's the final intention. So it's in a way used as a pre-standard so that it can be used by the user community, provide feedback, and then fit into the normal development process. Next. So the benefits of using the ISO and IEC Guide 21, this is a document, a guide for standard writers and for member bodies on how to adopt all the ISO deliverables. So we're talking about the formal ISO standards, technical specification, technical reports, publicly available specifications, ISO guides, and IWAs. So the reasons that this document is important for the national standards bodies is that ISO will publish the document, alert the member bodies that this document is available for them to use nationally. And again, the benefit of that is that even if the country has not participated in the work, they benefit from the exchange of that technology. The document, as it was mentioned earlier, provides the state of the art in a particular sector. So a country that perhaps lacks that technology can benefit from it. It also benefits from the fact that we use experts worldwide to develop these documents. In fact, in the ISO database, we have in excess of 100,000 experts listed as taking part in this work. And ISO work happens in committees on an average of 26 meetings per day, every day of the year. It increases the opportunities to access global markets and participate in transnational supply chains because these documents, as having global consensus, they are recognized by the countries that have implemented them. They facilitate the trade and add consistency. Again, the structure and the requirements in the document and that recognition in the different countries brings the acceptance. So trade flows more easily with that recognition, avoiding to pay dues in the exchange and having certificates that are mutually recognized. And this, of course, follows our obligations under the principles of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, on the technical barriers to trade agreement. Next. So Guide 21, as I mentioned, provides the methods to take those ISO documents and bring them into the national standards body as one of their own publications. The guide defines a system for indicating the correspondence so that we know that two member bodies adopting a document, they have the same kind of understanding of what they're doing. It promotes coherence in the way that we adopt by giving those guidelines in how to adopt any of those different types. You remember the formal standards, the technical specifications, and so on. And it gives greater uniformity when indicating that there are deviations adopted to the national context. And of course, it helps the communication because it prevents confusion on what are these documents. Next. This guide provides certain degrees of correspondence. We have here the three main ones, and the preferred option is obviously the identical adoption, which is basically taking the ISO document as published and slapping a front cover stating that this is the national document. Then there's a modified adoption, which allows the member body to take that ISO publication, make some changes, additions, deletions, or modifications that apply to the national context in that sector. They specify those changes in a national forward at the front of the document so that the reader is clear what is different from the national part to the international one. And then we also have the not so preferred option, which is the non-equivalent, which is basically taking the ISO content and developing something using parts of it, but bringing it more into the national flavor of that country. Next. This is just a basic diagram showing that the formal standard is the IS, the international standard, which is then adopted as a national standard, whatever it is, the denomination in the country. And then the rest of the deliverables that you see in the left-hand column, the TS, technical specification, publicly available specification, international workshop agreement, technical report, guide, etc. Then there can be any other types of deliverables. Next. So for the national adoption, what we look at is two methods. One is the endorsement, which is basically taking the English or French or Russian official language versions and then putting the front cover as a national standard. We also have more frequently the republication, which involves reprinting, translating, and also redrafting. We prefer with this model to have as few changes as possible and no deviations, so that it's identical. And then we know that the user community will see that national standard used exactly the same in different countries. That helps with the acceptance, the mutual acceptance of documents and also goods and services. If editorial changes take place and there are deviations, again, because there are requirements at national level that prevent the adoption of certain parts of the standard, we need to declare them in the document, again, for transparency, so that the user is clear of what parts will be different in the national context from that of the international one. And the redrafting, again, is not recommended because it makes it difficult to map what is the national version as compared to an international one. And then this is a hindrance for the reasons that I mentioned earlier related to barriers to trade and the supply chain moving across borders. Next. And that's basically the simple process that we follow, encouraging our member bodies to adopt all those documents as national standards, to engage with the national community so that we can get feedback and then move on to the next phase and the maintenance of those documents. So with that, thank you very much indeed for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Jose. That was a really interesting presentation. So you've heard a little bit more about international workshop agreements. If you still don't understand 100% about them, and especially about the farmer organizations one, don't worry, we're going to cover all of your needs as we go along. But before we move on, I'd like to just quickly launch another poll, just to see if you've had a sense of, if you feel that, just one moment, please. Okay, here we go. If you feel that you've understood a little bit about what makes them, unique and what is the benefit of developing an IWA. So with that, I'm launching the poll. I would very much appreciate if you could just quickly take the time to respond, and then we'll close it after a few seconds. We're going to give about 10 more seconds. Sorry, there's not a lot of time. Three more seconds. Okay, thank you. So in your view, the top reason is that any stakeholder can participate, even those that are not involved in the ISO system. Absolutely. It's an opportunity to build consensus before proceeding to a full standard. Also true. And that's the second highest rated, if you want, of the poll. And it's also faster to develop. So all of these are true, but it's interesting that you pick the open stakeholder participation as the key element. Okay, so with that, we're going to move on now to the next part of our presentation. Okay, so now I would like to invite the next speaker to the floor, Ms. Sabrina Umbergate, Vice President of Strategic Growth and Partnerships of ACDI VOCA. Sabrina provides strategic analysis and business intelligence to advance growth and diversification of clients and partnerships at ACDI VOCA, a US nonprofit that helps people and communities improve their lives by increasing economic prosperity and social inclusion. She has over 20 years of experience in international development in various business development, technical, and project management roles focusing on food security, resilience, market systems, agriculture, capacity building, and civil society strengthening. She serves on the board of the Agribusiness Market Ecosystem Alliance, AMEA, a global network for accelerating the professionalization of farmer organizations, and she chaired the working group responsible for the development of IWA 29. So without further ado, Sabrina, I invite you to the floor.
Thank you. Good day to everyone. I'm going to share with you the background of how IWA 29 came to be and where we hope to take it. So AMEA is a global network of, oh, sorry, next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So AMEA is a global network of public and private organizations that are dedicated to accelerating the professionalization of farmer organizations, particularly those formed by and for smallholder farmers. Our alliance of 22 members and 9 strategic partners currently reaches millions of smallholder farmers in more than 80 countries. Our goal is to transform the way in which farmers and their organizations are supported. In most emerging market countries, hundreds of different projects deliver business development services in a stovepiped and fragmented way, with every project using its own different tools and approaches. And as a result, the farmer organizations often have to undergo the same assessments and receive the same trainings over and over again, and yet they're unable to demonstrate the clear progress towards professionalization that would help them get access to more and better markets and financing. Next slide, please. So to help address this, AMEA felt we needed a common language, a set of globally agreed guidelines that would help define and describe a professional farmer organization. So we initiated the guidelines and we worked with ISO and NEN to design IWA 29 to provide this common language and standard for all stakeholders in the agricultural sector. These common guidelines facilitate different stakeholders to better align in their support for farmer organizations and for farmer organizations to demonstrate their professionalism in a universally understood way. We believe that if farmer organizations and the organizations that support them use proven tools and approaches and curricula that are aligned around the common standard of the IWA 29 global guidelines, then farmer organization professionalism will improve, which will enable them to gain better access to markets and finance. And ultimately, that results in improved livelihoods for smallholder farmers and their communities and more resilient food supply chains. Next slide, please. So why an IWA specifically? Once AMEA was clear that a globally agreed guideline was needed, we had to determine the best way to achieve that. And it was critical that we use a process that would be internationally recognized and accepted. And that's what ISO provides. However, as you heard, it usually takes over 3 years to develop an international standard. And it's accomplished primarily through closed ISO committees. And the IWA, on the other hand, only takes a year to produce, and it allows for that direct participation by the full range of stakeholders, which was just noted as being sort of a key aspect. It also helps ensure that the agreement is transparent, commonly understood, that it's really grounded in the realities of the sector, and that it's credible. An IWA was also particularly appropriate for us since this issue is one where ISO doesn't have a lot of in-house expertise, where we really needed to build consensus on the definition or on the guidelines, and where we felt that testing and stakeholder buy-in was needed prior to developing that full standard. Next slide, please. So just to give you a better idea of the full process that we followed and the timeline, AMEA started the initiative to develop the global guidelines. We sort of hatched the idea in March of 2017. We formed a working group, the Global Guidelines Working Group, we called it, which drafted the guidelines. And once we selected to use an ISO process, we engaged NEN to serve as our secretariat. NEN worked with us to develop and submit the IWA proposal to ISO in January 2018. We really wanted to maximize engagement and participation. So we led a really strong outreach campaign to bring as many stakeholders to the table as we could. This included, among other things, 8 regional workshops in Uganda, Ethiopia, Cote d'Ivoire, Thailand, Peru, Honduras, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And we had over 250 participants across these workshops. And of course, in addition, all the ISO member bodies were invited to contribute. Stakeholders worldwide registered online to review and comment, give their input on the draft guidelines. And that process culminated in a 2-day international workshop agreement, which was an in-person workshop in the Netherlands in November 2018. Any organization, company, individual was allowed to comment on the draft and to attend the workshop. The workshop was led by NEN and our independent chairperson, who was Joanne Sonnenschein. And they worked through the workshop to build consensus on the language and the wording. And then the final IWA 29 was published in February 2019, just 13 months after we first submitted our proposal. Next slide, please. So the final guidelines describe the key characteristics of professional farmer organizations across 6 core capacity areas, which you can see here. The standard is envisioned primarily for farmer organizations in developing countries or non-developed countries, but it's intended to be broadly applicable regardless of the size of the organization, the specific country, or what the farmers produce, and even to apply for aquaculture and livestock. The guidelines really strive to be universal and to focus on what's needed to meet the organization's objectives rather than being very prescriptive or overly specific about specific processes or structure. Next slide, please. So one of the key differences between IWA 29 and the types of agricultural standards and certifications that many people are familiar with, such as Global GAP, UTS, or Fair Trade, or even quality management standards like the ISO 9000 series, is that IWA 29 was not intended to be a pass-fail certification. Rather, the guidelines focus on increasing understanding and confidence among actors, really aligning the vision and interventions to support farmer organizations to become more professional and businesslike, and encouraging active engagement amongst all the different supply chain actors. They don't necessarily address every capacity or aspect of professionalism that might be important for a specific market or customer, but we do believe that the language is quite universal and broadly applicable. This table shows a wide variety of potential uses and benefits of IWA 29. Just some examples: it can facilitate greater alignment of expectations across the actors in a value chain. It can help identify and communicate the strengths and weaknesses of farmer organizations in order to better target capacity building and make that more efficient, and avoid that redundancy that I mentioned earlier and duplication of effort. It can inform government policy and standards. It can improve the design of farmer organization assessments and training curricula. Farmer organizations themselves can use them to hold their service providers accountable, or for members to hold their governance accountable, as well as to demonstrate their professionalism to buyers, suppliers, and investors. They can also be used for monitoring, evaluation, and reporting to donors. And you'll hear some more very specific examples of the uses and benefits of IWA 29 from the next three presenters who have sort of different perspectives to offer. Next slide, please. So as you heard, IWAs are initially valid for 3 years, at which point they are reviewed and they can be withdrawn, extended, or converted into a regular international standard. And converting to an international standard is what we hope to do with IWA 29. So with this in mind, AMEA has been working to broadly promote awareness as well as application and adoption of the guidelines by different stakeholders, and to capture and share feedback and lessons learned. Among other things, we've developed informational material, surveys, we've held workshops and given presentations like this one. We've developed a worksheet that can be used that's freely available to assess the alignment between existing farmer organization strengthening tools and the IWA 29. This will all help inform the systematic review of the IWA, which we are hoping to start soon. As we approach the end of the 3 years, we have started really actively researching the different ways that we can, the different paths to convert the IWA to an international standard. And we're currently looking at different existing ISO technical committees to see if we should work with one of them, or if it would be better for our purposes to propose a new project committee. This is a little bit of a different topic, and it doesn't necessarily fit really nicely into the existing ISO committees. But on the other hand, forming a new project committee does require more time and effort and building that stakeholder and expert base. We also want to make sure that we continue to have really good stakeholder engagement in the process as much as possible. So we're working to connect our AMEA members and other interested stakeholders with the national standards bodies in various countries to prepare those bodies to participate when the project is submitted for voting. And we also want to position AMEA members and other stakeholders to be able to participate as experts in the national mirror committees that will eventually be the ones to take the lead on commenting on and shaping the international standard. As I said, we expect to start the systematic review of IWA 29, hopefully no later than Q1 of 2022. And we'll use that review to inform and draft our proposal to ISO. While it does normally take 3 years to publish an international standard, we believe that already having the IWA in place and our very engaged stakeholders and the other groundwork that we've been laying will help us to fast track the process. And hopefully we can achieve an international standard in maybe 2.5, maybe even 2 years. Next slide. So we have faced a number of challenges on our IWA journey. For example, because IWAs are not a very common deliverable, and in fact, ours is only the 29th one in the world, governments and standard bodies don't always understand exactly what they are or the best way to adopt or apply them. And there's also this innate dilemma in encouraging stakeholders to formally adopt an IWA when it's actually a temporary deliverable that we are planning to convert into a standard. So this is one of the reasons why we're moving to do that conversion to an international standard now, rather than renewing the IWA for another 3 years. Also, to help address this, we have formed what we call core teams in some interested countries. And those teams are made up of AMEA members, the private sector, the government, and other interested stakeholders and these teams work together to kind of explore the application and adoption of the guidelines within that specific country and context. And then we believe that work will help feed directly into the systematic review and the revisions to the IWA to help really make sure that it is a globally accepted document. Ideally, we would also like the IWA 29 to be actively used by farmer organizations themselves. But our main audience is farmer organizations in emerging market countries, and they don't necessarily have the resources to purchase the full IWA document. It costs, I think, 88 Swiss francs if you purchase it through the main ISO catalog. So to help address this, we have created a detailed overview of the guidelines that can be freely accessed through the AMEA website. And we've also advocated with ISO members in emerging market countries to offer the IWA at a lower cost locally. As I mentioned, one of the really great benefits of the IWA process is the ability to be market driven with broad direct stakeholder participation. And as we transition to the international standard process, there is still room for stakeholder engagement, as I think Jose mentioned, but it's in this very structured way that is driven by ISO members and processes. So that's the reason why we've been actively reaching out to ISO members in key countries where we think the guidelines are relevant and connecting interested stakeholders so that they are positioned to participate as experts. Next slide. Thank you. So if you would like more information about IWA 29, there's some resources listed here. In addition to the detailed overview, you can also download the worksheet to map out alignment of your tools and approaches with IWA 29 from the AMEA website, or feel free to contact AMEA directly. There's an email there. And of course, if you have any questions right now, just post those in the Q&A box and we will try to get to them by the end of the session, or if not, in writing afterwards. So thank you for your time, and I will hand it back to Francesco for the next poll.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Sabrina. That was a really interesting journey that you had there to develop IWA 29. So let's see as well what our public thinks today of this, the more interesting aspects of this IWA. So without further ado, I'm going to launch a poll. I'd be very grateful if you could just take the time to respond. And we will, here we go. Here we go. yeah, if you could just take a few seconds of your time to respond, I would very much appreciate it. We're going to give about 10 more seconds. I know it's a lot to read. About 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So the most interesting aspect that you have voted on is that it provides guidance to farmer organizations on how to improve their professionalism, leading to improved performance and access to finance and markets. That's exactly right, and it's a very interesting aspect. And the good news is we have someone who will look more in detail now at the finance aspects. And so I would like to introduce the next speaker, who will be Mr. Dieter Fischer, the Regional Lead of Agribusiness Advisory Services in Latin America and the Caribbean of the International Finance Corporation. Dieter is the Regional Lead for Agribusiness Advisory Service in Latin America and the Caribbean with 36 years of experience in agricultural development and smallholder supply chains. This includes experience in linking producer organizations to larger agribusiness, manufacture of agricultural technologies, increasing access to planting seed and other inputs, extension system design, trade association development, traceability, and results measurement. Sector expertise includes coffee, maize, groundnuts, cassava, rice, and sesame. So without further ado, I would like to invite Dieter to the floor. Dieter, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Francisco. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. We really appreciate you participating. So I'm going to talk a little bit about IFC and how we work as an organization, and then in particular how the IWA 29 applies to our work with agribusinesses. So I've entitled the presentation, Increasing Professionalism in Smallholder Supply Chains. And this is a key goal of ours in all of our engagements with agribusinesses. And typically we're working with the larger agribusinesses such as off-takers or input companies. And they have a strong interest in working with professional smallholder supply chains. And we see the IWA as a key part of that. Thanks. Next slide. So the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, is part of the World Bank Group. And the World Bank works with governments while the IFC works with the private sector. But we share two goals. One is to end extreme poverty, and the second is to increase shared prosperity. And the activities that we're going to talk about today fit into the second category because we're looking for initiatives that both increase the prosperity of businesses as well as their suppliers, who are typically smallholder farmers in many supply chains. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we're part of the World Bank Group. And one reason that the IWA process is very attractive to us is because we are owned by 185 countries around the world. So we have shareholders, all the countries in the world are the shareholders of the IFC, and we have operations across 100 countries. So having a standard of professionalization which applies globally is a very interesting prospect for us, and it really facilitates our work in the sector. Next. So the IFC has three main functions. The biggest and most important is investment. And so we make loans and provide equity to companies in a variety of sectors. We also provide advice to those companies, both to create markets and to unlock investment opportunities. And finally, we mobilize investments by others. The part of the IFC that I work for is the advice part. So we design programs that work with smallholder supply chains and our agribusiness clients. Last year we did nearly $22 billion in business, and our advisory program is about 274 million across all of the sectors and countries. Next. So here you can see how our investments break out by sector. The blue area is agribusiness and forestry, which we're talking about today, 9.5%. But actually, in the other side of the graph on the financial markets, quite a number of the investments that we make in banks and other financial institutions are being on-lent to farmers. So the importance of the IWA is not just to the agribusiness and forestry investments, but it's also to those investments in banks and microfinance institutions that then on-lend to farmers. And having professional standards for farmers organizations is useful for both parts of our business. Next. So when we focus in on food security and agriculture, we know that the agribusiness sector is directly impacting 8 out of the 17 SDGs. And we see a huge gap in financing that's required to achieve food security and to meet the SDGs. So we estimate that that's $480 billion per year of investment that's needed to achieve the SDGs. And we see building strong smallholder supply chains as a key part of that, and in particular, producer organizations. And so that's where our interest in the IWA came in. And we've been an active member of the AMEA organization since the beginning, and we've worked closely with the other folks that you'll meet on this call to achieve the IWA, and we're continuing to work to achieve the full standard, as Sabrina mentioned. Thanks. Next slide. So, as I mentioned earlier, our clients will tend to be the large food brands or off-takers that are purchasing crops from smallholders farmers, and that could be in the coffee sector, cocoa, palm oil, horticulture, dairy. So there's a range of sectors where smallholder farmers predominate. And we see a number of challenges across all of those sectors: low productivity, a lack of technical and business skills, access to finance, unsustainable practices, and difficulty in measuring impact. So I think you can see how a standard for professional farmers organizations could help us, particularly with the first 3 challenges, and especially the lack of technical and business skills that we often find with smallholder farmers. Next slide. So this slide is a bit complicated, but we look at our agribusiness investments through 3 lenses, or we have 3 pillars for investment: food security, inclusive growth and shared prosperity, and then sustainability. And so what I've done with the red boxes is identify those particular parts of the 3 pillars that are directly related to the IWA 29, and that we see professional farmers organizations as the vehicle to achieve those outcomes in the red boxes. So I'll just highlight a couple of them. In particular, if we look at improving efficiency and lower cost of food distribution and logistics, we can imagine producer organization that is aggregating crops and then sending those food crops to exporters. And so having a more professional farmers organization will increase efficiency and reduce the cost of food distribution. And if we look at the second column, we can see a number of activities that are directly related, in particular, building the capacity of local producers, and also enhancing the linkages between farmers, SMEs like producer organizations, and larger agribusinesses. And then finally, under sustainability, we see promotion of climate smart agriculture as a key goal of the future as climate change becomes more and more significant, and it affects smallholder farmers in many ways. So helping farmers become more resilient through their producer organizations is a key activity. Thanks. So our response to this challenge has been to develop something we call the Agribusiness Leadership Program. And this is a training program which helps farmers and producer organizations become more professional. And it comprises 3 parts. It begins with an assessment of capacity, and we do much of this work in collaboration with a Dutch company called Scope Insight, who is also an active member of AMEA. Then we provide training, which is highly participatory and follows a modular approach. And then the training is followed by coaching. And so that each co-op develops a plan to improve their business and to become more professional. And then we accompany them through that coaching program. So we've been working on the Agricultural Leadership Program for some time now. And there are a number of features I'd just like to mention. It's a curriculum that's available to AMEA members. So this is an incentive for organizations to join AMEA. It's worked with over 580 farmers organizations, and it's facilitated financing for over 300 organizations. So the ALP is closely aligned with IWA 29, as is the Scope Insight Assessment Program. So when we implement the Agribusiness Leadership Program, we are following the principles that are laid out in IWA 29. And the standard helps us to align our programs and helps us to replicate our programs across countries, because we're applying the same standard, the same principles in each market that we operate in. Thanks. Next slide. So now I'm going to dive into a particular case and spend a bit of time on this. This is the program that we're doing with Cargill in West Africa, in Cote d'Ivoire. And it's been running a number of years, and it's kind of been our test bed for initiatives to work with producer organizations. Cargill is procuring cocoa from a very disaggregated supply chain made up of co-ops and individual suppliers, as well as SME collectors. And so they have a strong interest in building that supply chain to become more professional and more loyal and more effective. So when you look at the needs of Cargill, in particular, they need high quality, traceable cocoa that's coming from sustainable co-ops. And these co-ops often need financing. So helping these co-ops link to financial institutions is a key goal of Cargill's. So the issue that we tried to solve in this program was that the co-ops purchase cocoa in rural areas from the members. They aggregate that cocoa together, and then they ship it to Cargill by truck. And generally, the co-op's trucks were old, and that they would often break down. Often at the critical moment when they're collecting the harvest, the truck would be out of commission, and the co-op wouldn't be able to deliver the cocoa. So we designed, we designed a program to help these co-ops get truck leases for new trucks. And so part of the process was to increase the professionalization of the co-ops so they were capable of managing those truck leases effectively. And we brought in a leasing company and financial institution. So during phase one of the program, we began using the standardized capacity building ALP program that I mentioned earlier. And we also began using a benchmarking tool called Scope Basic, which allows us to assess professionalism of co-ops. And both of these two initiatives are aligned with IWA 29. Later in the program, we brought in financial institutions to provide digital payments to farmers and to linking farmers and co-ops to these truck lease programs. So after phase one, which ended last year, you can see the results have been quite impressive. We saw a significant increase in the professionalization of the co-ops. We established a risk-sharing cooperative, and farmers through the cooperatives were able to access over $8 million in leasing for new trucks. 10,000 farmers established mobile money accounts. And so this program is now being expanded and rolled out to a broader range of co-ops. And it's also been replicated in a number of other countries in West Africa, including Cameroon and Ghana. So I just mentioned a couple of other things about our goals with IWA 29. We would very much like to see it move on to a full standard. We're actively participating with AMEA and other stakeholders. And we also see a lot of potential to work with governments through our World Bank colleagues. So there's been a lot of discussions about how IWA 29 can fit into World Bank programs with governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dieter. It's really quite a fascinating field of work that you're involved in, and I also see that there's a lot of potential for this IWA. And perhaps also this is a good time as well to turn to the audience and ask them what they think. So with that, I would like to open just another poll and see what you all think as well on why public organizations such as the IFC see potential in this international workshop agreement. So without further ado, I'm going to launch the poll now. And I would very much appreciate if you could take a few seconds of your time to respond. Thank you. The poll will only be open for about 30 seconds. So I will just repeat this question. Why should public organizations such as the IFC see potential in the IWA? I'm just going to leave it for about 10 more seconds. Three more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. So as you can see on the screen, the highest voted part is that it will help users engage with financial institutions and or other value chain actors to obtain investment or working capital. That's a very important aspect. The second highest rated is that it enables a shared understanding on how to effectively build professionalism of smallhold farmer organizations in emerging markets, another really important aspect. And of course, it can contribute to achieving multiple UN Sustainable Development Goals, as Dieter mentioned in his presentation. So thank you very much for participating in this poll. Now we're going to move on to another part of the presentation from our colleagues in Peru. Basically, I would just like to invite the speaker, Ms. Gloria Castillo, the specialist in the standardization directorate of the Instituto Nacional de Calidad in INACAL of Peru, ISO member in Peru. Mrs. Castillo is an engineer in food industries, specialized in food and beverage quality and safety management, as well as in business agricultural management. She has extensive experience in the field of the food industry in national and international technical standardization, quality management, and technical administrative support in production plants. Ms. Castillo has worked professionally in companies of recognized national and international prestige as well. So without further ado, I would invite Ms. Castillo to the floor.
Thank you. Many thanks to everyone joining us today. I am pleased to share Peru's experience with IWA 29. So we may begin with the next slide. I would like to first start with a brief introduction of who we are. INACAL is Peru's national standard body and ISO member. We are the maximum authority leading Peru's national system on quality. We promote and assure compliance to Peru's national policy on quality with the aim to further the development and competitiveness of economic activities while safeguarding consumers' rights. INACAL is organized in 4 directorates. I will start with the Directorate for Quality Strategic Development. They are focused in promoting the application of our national policy and quality and integrating Peru's quality infrastructural services. Then we have the Directorate for Metrology. They are responsible for traceability in national measures and also provide calibration services for equipment and instruments. We also have the Directorate for Accreditation, who are in charge of assessing the technical competence of conformity assessment bodies, which is recognized nationally and internationally. Last but not least, we have the Directorate for Standardization, responsible for overseeing the development of national Peruvian standards and documents. Today, we have close 5,000 national standards and documents published. Next, please. And so how are these standards and documents developed? Well, just to give a quick overview. All national standards and documents start from a market need. may it be from the producers or the consumers or any other interested party or stakeholder. Standards and documents are drafted by technical standardization committees whose members represent producers, consumers, academia, as well as the private, public, and technical sector. All standards and documents are developed according to the Code of Good Practices for the preparation, adoption, and application of a standard, also known as the TBT Code of Good Practices of the WTO and ISO and AEC policies and directives as applicable. It is in this regard that our national standard and documents have an inquiry stage of 60 days before their approval and publication. Next, please. National standardization technical committees. So we have more than 50,000 standards that have been created by our technical standardization committee. These are divided by sector, as you may view in the following graph. It is clear that 35% of our committees correspond to agriculture and food sector, and 13% to environment and health protection sector. This shows the importance of these issues in our country, and it was one of the reasons that we were interested in adopting IWA 29 as a Peruvian sector agreement when ISO IWA 29 was published in 2020. There was an initiative to publish IWA 29 officially in Spanish, and even though this is still a possibility, as the document is important for us, we published a national adoption in December of last year in 2020. Next, please. Now, cooperative in Peru. So to highlight the importance of the document for our country, I would like to share some key information from our first national census on cooperative held in 2017. In 2017, we had over 1,245 cooperatives in our national territory. Most cooperatives were located in Lima and Callao, about 34.9% are of the total, followed by Junín and other regions like Cusco, Puno, Cajamarca, Arequipa. Cooperatives in Peru have shown to be an important engine of growth and employment. It is estimated that 2016 they generate 17,000 formal jobs in the country, and their income amounted to approximately 2,541 million soles, a number that represents about 0.2% of our national gross domestic product. In 2017, 90.4% of the cooperatives were micro and small enterprises, comprised by about 2.4 million partners, of which 40% are women. Furthermore, 39.9% of cooperatives were agrarian, making this an important sector to generate awareness regarding IWA 29 on professional farming organizations and its benefits. Now, how was the adoption process like? As I mentioned, our national standard and documents are drafted by national technical standardization committees. So our first step was to identify the technical committee best fit with the scope of IWA 29. This is how our Committee on Garden, Vegetables and Related Products under the Secretariat of our Ministry of Agrarian Development and Irrigation welcomed the initiative to adopt the document as a Peruvian sector agreement. As you may see from the slide, committee members include a representative of farmer organization. I would also like to mention that during the international technical work to develop IWA 29, one of the workshops was held in Peru, where organizations such as Peruvian Association of Cocoa Producer and the Minister of Production, Ricolto, Carabela Coffee, among others participated. With the support of our partners from Agribusiness Market Ecosystem Alliance, AMEA, stakeholders were called in our country, and they actively participate in face-to-face sessions during 2019 and beginning of 2020. During these sessions, the document was revised and translated. When Peru was declared under national emergency due to COVID-19 in March of 2020, there was a pause in the technical work, but the committee was quickly able to adapt the holding virtual sessions to complete the adoption process. Here, well, having gone over the process to publish ASP AWA, I would like to now highlight some key aspects of the document. IWA 29 provides guidelines for professional farmer organizations so they may exchange their capacities in different areas and improve their overall business performance. This way, professional farmer organizations will have better access to business opportunities, more benefits for their members and staff, greater market share, and sustainable process. All clauses from 4 to 11 are keys, as you can see in the slide. Benefits of these documents, which are always important to highlight, is that by implementing the guidelines, professional farming organizations will have better access to finance opportunities and markets. So it's important to empower supporting members and staff of professional farming organizations to change their leadership within the organization by demonstrating that they are applying IWA 29. A professional farming organization will be more attractive to buyers suppliers, investors, and other agents interested in doing business with the organization. This document also has an important focus on the active participation of stakeholders in the delivery of training, evaluation, advisory, and other organizational and business development services. Well, first of all, with the help of the Swiss SECO Cooperation and UNIDO in Peru, through the Global Quality and Standard Program, INACAL is co-implementing a project for strengthening and the quality of coffee and cocoa for Peruvian exports. This project is being carried out in the San Martin region with cooperatives that are locally to identify needs. One such needs is training capacity regarding management aspects. To this end, we will be training 8 coffee and cocoa cooperatives of the region in IWA 29. Secondly, we are organizing an event with the help of AMEA, where we will continue to disseminate this important work and benefits of IWA 29 during the month of September. I am grateful to be able to share the experience to our country in this process of the adoption and dissemination process of the IWA, and I want to extend my gratitude to the Ministry of Agrarian Development and Irrigation Secretariat and members, to our Garden, Vegetable and Related Products Committee for their commitment. I would also like to thank the San Martin Regional Government and all farmer organizations who have taken up the challenge of improving their management and implementing IWA 29. And thanks for your time. And give the floor to Francesco, who will present the following poll.
Thank you very much, Gloria. That was really helpful, really informative, and we wish best of luck for Peru with the development of this document and its implementation. And now I would, as Gloria said, I would just like to launch another poll, and if you just give me 1 second, it will appear on the screen. And I would very much appreciate hearing from you on what you felt were the benefits of adopting the IWA that you heard through the presentation. As always, the poll will only be open for a few seconds, so I appreciate if you take the time to quickly respond, and then I will share the results. So the poll is now open. Another few more seconds. 10 seconds. Three more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you very much for participating in the poll. It's very interesting to see that actually the highest benefit for adopting the IWA seems to be showing acceptance by national stakeholders, including public and private. The next highest rated was the support of the national standards body with greater awareness of the IWA. And the next there's tie is a greater availability of the IWA or availability of a price that fits the local market. So thank you very much for participating in that poll. And now I would like to invite the last speaker for today, who is Mr. Fernando Garcia Marino, the CEO of the Asociación Nacional de Industriales of ANDI of Honduras. Mr. Fernando Garcia Marino is, as I said, the CEO. He has been a manager of institutional development in the Association of Municipalities of Honduras, Corporation Aggregate of the Honduran Embassy in Italy, credit manager at Bana Deza, and banking analyst at the Central Bank of Honduras. In addition to this, he is a published author with publications such as Policies and Institutions for Territorial Economic Development, The Case of Honduras, Business Freedom, and Business Freedom and Human Rights. both in collaboration with the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom and the Human Rights Industry Guide. Without further ado, I give the floor to Fernando. Thank you very much. And now we will just quickly...
Muchas gracias, buenos días. Voy a hacer la presentación en español. Como presidente de la Asociación Nacional de Industriales en Honduras, pues correcto. Hemos desarrollado una propuesta de desarrollo industrial que básicamente es un documento que sirve de guía, de política para la institución y para promover el desarrollo de la industria en el país. Se busca con este instrumento poder generar propuestas de política pública que el gobierno, que la cooperación internacional, que las agencias multilaterales. ¿Hay algún problema con la...? Ok, continúo. Que esta propuesta sirva como una guía para nuestro accionar con el gobierno, con la cooperación internacional, con diferentes organizaciones multilaterales y que promueva el desarrollo de la industria en el país. Esta propuesta de desarrollo industrial tiene 6 ejes y estos ejes, el primero es el capital humano, el segundo es lo que nos llama el día de hoy a esta discusión, que es fundamentalmente estándares, calidad y normas internacionales. Vamos a hablar al respecto más adelante. Luego hay un eje de innovación, tecnología, un eje de gremios y alianzas, articulación sectorial, asociatividad y encadenamientos productivos, que forma parte también de estos procesos que está promoviendo IWA 29, y por último los instrumentos de fomento a la producción. Vamos a enfocarnos entonces en este segundo eje de nuestra propuesta de desarrollo industrial, que es el que está relacionado con el tema de normas, estándares y calidad. Para nosotros es importante cumplir con estos estándares internacionales, ya que esto genera una mayor proactividad, una mayor competitividad para las empresas y también consigue que puedan cumplir con ciertos requisitos que exigen sus clientes en el mercado internacional, así como dentro de la cadena otros eslabones de la cadena de valor. Por esto es importante para nosotros que estos elementos de la propuesta industrial relacionados con el tema de calidad puedan irse implementando de acuerdo a lo que nosotros vamos gestionando con nuestro gobierno. Creo que tal vez podemos adelantar la siguiente lámina. Dentro de la problemática que hemos identificado, la siguiente, por favor. La siguiente. Ok, la otra. Correcto. Dentro de lo que hemos identificado como una problemática relevante es que hay una limitada certificación de empresas y procesos y también de certificación de competencias laborales en la mano de obra, y hay un poco cumplimiento en los estándares nacionales e internacionales dentro de lo que son las empresas en Honduras. Esto lo podemos ver bien marcado, hay una diferencia profunda dentro de lo que son las empresas multinacionales o con capital extranjero y lo que son las empresas que tienen participación 100% local. Las empresas multinacionales traen procesos, traen normas, traen estándares, traen certificaciones, tanto de competencias laborales como certificaciones de procesos, y eso facilita pues su competencia en el mercado internacional. Sin embargo, el resto de la cadena no lo tiene tan implementado, no lo tiene tan claro, no lo conoce tan bien, y las empresas que son netamente hondureñas, de capital hondureño, no lo consiguen. Ese es un problema importante. Tenemos que trabajar mucho para poder conseguir que las empresas hondureñas puedan adquirir esta formación y puedan certificarse, tanto ellas como sus colaboradores, para poder competir en este mercado globalizado. Hay poca conciencia de la importancia de las normas. Muchas veces las normas y las certificaciones se entienden únicamente como un una obligación para cumplir con un proveedor y no se ha podido transmitir correctamente el mensaje de que estas normas en realidad van a facilitar y van a poder mejorar los procesos productivos y darle un valor agregado a las instituciones, las empresas, las cooperativas que puedan implementarlos. Por tanto, es importante hacer esa labor de crear conciencia en estas organizaciones empresariales y en las empresas para que se puedan implementar con mayor facilidad las normas internacionales. Hay una frágil apropiación y aplicación de los conceptos también de responsabilidad social y de tener ese encadenamiento en el proceso productivo. La siguiente lámina, por favor. Dentro de esta propuesta de desarrollo industrial, nosotros hemos hecho algunas recomendaciones. Vamos a ver las que están relacionadas con el tema precisamente de normas, estándares y calidad. Y vamos a ver cómo esto conecta casi a la perfección, a la medida, con lo que se está proponiendo con IWA 29 y con las acciones que se están desarrollando desde ISO también. La siguiente, por favor. Correcto. La segunda recomendación que tenemos es promover que las asociaciones empresariales puedan ser más, tengan más conocimiento acerca de los beneficios y la competitividad que puedan aportar estas normas y estándares, incluidos IWA 29, entre otros, tanto a las industrias en aspectos industriales, ambientales, laborales, sociales, y que en todos los niveles de las organizaciones del sector privado se pueda ver esto como oportunidades de mejora en la productividad, en la calidad de los productos y los servicios, y que generen también oportunidades de mercado tanto internos como externos. Es importante asumir que los gremios, por parte de los gremios empresariales, un papel de proveedor de información sobre las normas, los estándares nacionales e internacionales, así como sobre los programas de apoyo financiero que puedan facilitar a las empresas poder implementar todas estas normas que les van a traer estos beneficios. Dentro de las acciones estratégicas que se definen para lograr esta recomendación, se han definido la formación de un centro de recopilación y divulgación de información relativa a las normas, estándares y estándares internacionales, así como programas financieros que faciliten su implementación. Por ejemplo, lo que escuchábamos más al inicio sobre lo que está desarrollando el IFC en esta materia. La asociación ha creado dentro de su página web un portal, un espacio donde se puede compartir información respecto al tema de normas, estándares y calidad y los trabajos que nuestro comité de calidad está desarrollando. También se trabajó en la formulación de un plan de divulgación y sensibilización y socialización sobre lo que son los estándares, las normas, la calidad y sus beneficios para las empresas y para las organizaciones. Y hemos desarrollado una serie de foros, talleres para promover el aprendizaje en estos temas de normas internacionales y cómo esto puede beneficiar al mercado doméstico y al mercado de exportación. También somos un ente que facilita las consultorías para la implementación de normas y estándares internacionales a través de diferentes vínculos. Podemos trabajar con cooperación internacional para apoyar a micro, pequeñas empresas en la adopción de las normas internacionales. Y también tenemos un instituto de formación profesional en el país que es financiado con aportaciones del sector privado. Y este instituto nos financia también para poder hacer acciones de formación puntual en las empresas que les permitan llegar a las certificaciones que requieren para poder trabajar en el mercado. Estos recursos no son todos los que nosotros deseáramos, pero con proyectos puntuales, como por ejemplo la adopción en Honduras del IWA 29, se puede estructurar opciones para que este Instituto de Formación Profesional pudiera facilitar recursos para la formación de cooperativas de productores agrícolas que estén insertos en la cadena de valor de la agroindustria y poderlos capacitar y llevar a estas certificaciones, por ejemplo, como la de IWA 29. La siguiente, por favor. Otra recomendación que tenemos es promover desde los gremios, como es la Asociación de Industriales, los procesos de certificación en conjunto con las instituciones estatales y las internacionales, la cooperación, creando incentivos para esa acelerada implementación y aplicación de normas. Como les decía anteriormente, las normas tienen un alto nivel de conocimiento y alto nivel de aplicabilidad en lo que es las empresas multinacionales, pero en las empresas de capital local se tiene que trabajar mucho. Y los gremios, como la Asociación de Industriales, como las cooperativas, como las cámaras de comercio en distintas localidades del territorio hondureño, son las que deben, las que pueden promover y pueden facilitar la adopción de estas prácticas. Hay cooperativas que están teniendo un impacto muy importante con pequeños productores, sobre todo en el rubro del café, en el rubro de la palma africana y también en el rubro del cacao. Así que ya hay una experiencia dentro de pequeños productores agrícolas que entienden que la certificación y la adopción de estas normas internacionales y otras, como pueden ser Rainforest Alliance o como pueden ser las ISO, van a beneficiar y van a generar un valor agregado en su producto y esto pues es la principal motivación de un campesino, de un productor, de un empresario, que la acción que va a tomar genere un valor agregado y genere un beneficio económico. Es importante buscar mecanismos adecuados de inclusión de las MIPYME en estos procesos de certificación y de aplicación de normas, ya que algunos de ellos son costosos y es necesario que podamos ampliar esta implementación en toda la cadena de valor. Se ha trabajado en la estructuración de lo que es el Sistema Nacional de Calidad. La asociación propuso que se creara por ley. Esto se logró hace algunos años. Es importante que el Sistema Nacional de Calidad en Honduras funcione y para eso requiere de recursos financieros y el recurso humano necesario. Y ahí es importante que el Estado, a través del Poder Ejecutivo y del Congreso Nacional, apoyen y fortalezcan el Instituto Nacional de Calidad, del cual nosotros formamos parte y del cual forma parte también el organismo hondureño de normalización, que sería el ente encargado a nivel nacional de poder implementar este tipo de normas, así como lo escuchamos en el caso de INACAL de Perú. Entonces es importante fortalecer la estructura del Sistema Nacional de Calidad con los recursos necesarios para que ellos puedan tener resultados importantes. También hemos formulado propuestas para la promoción e implementación de las normas estándares internacionales en las empresas industriales. Como les he dicho, hemos hecho foros, congresos, capacitaciones puntuales en las empresas para poder promover esta implementación de las normas en nuestras empresas. También se han formulado proyectos específicos en el área del cacao, en el área de la industria de alimentos y bebidas, para fortalecer todo lo que es sus competencias, y también se ha trabajado mucho el tema que lo mencionaron también al inicio, creo que Francesco, de la inocuidad en la industria de alimentos, que es un elemento importante y cada vez más importante ahora que estamos en la etapa, estamos saliendo de la pandemia y que todos los temas de bioseguridad, todos los temas de inocuidad de alimentos van a tener una preponderancia importante y que el mercado va a requerir esta comprobación, esta certificación, esta validación de que la industria y los productores están cumpliendo con todas esas medidas de bioseguridad y de inocuidad en la producción de estos productos alimenticios. También es importante identificar fuentes financieras para la promoción e implementación de estas normas internacionales y para la acreditación y certificación de empresas industriales en Honduras. Actualmente no tenemos una empresa local que haga las labores de certificación y de acreditación. Es importante que se pueda promover ese mercado en el país para que no se tenga que contratar estos servicios desde fuera y que se puedan abaratar los costos. La siguiente. Como les decía, el trabajo fundamental que hemos venido desarrollando en los últimos 15 años ha sido ir bajando de la gran industria transnacional o de capital extranjero todo el conocimiento, toda la experiencia, todas las normas y los procesos para que la mediana, la pequeña y la microempresa pueda ir avanzando en los procesos de certificación y de normas. Hay algunas normas que tienen algún nivel de importancia superior. Tenemos las de seguridad ocupacional, han tenido mucha importancia, sobre todo en la etapa de la pandemia. También todo lo relacionado, como les decía, a los temas de bioseguridad y también a las diferentes normas ISO, dependiendo de en qué sector de la industria se encuentre. Pero sí es importante tomar experiencia de el éxito que ha tenido la cadena de café, la cadena de cacao y la cadena de palma, un poco la cadena de azúcar también, en poder estructurar todas esas normas internacionales en beneficio de los productores, en beneficio de la agroindustria y al final también del consumidor. Y creemos que la implementación de las normas IWA 29 pueden tener un impacto importante también en estas cadenas que ya mencioné, que tienen un poco más de expertise, pero también en nuevas cadenas de producción agropecuaria, agroindustrial. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Fernando. That was an excellent presentation. And honestly, we hope that this IWA will continue to have the effect that is desired in professionalizing farmer organizations in Honduras. Now we're moving on to the question and answers portion of the session today. And I'm going to quickly look at a question and then maybe one of the panelists, if you can all activate your cameras and come back to the floor, then perhaps you can choose if you would want to and who would like to answer this question. We have a first question here. Can this guide be used as a base to classify and set criteria for farmer organizations to accept them in participation in any projects supported by donors? I can repeat the question if you would like. Can this guide be used as a base to classify and set criteria for farmer organizations to accept them in participating in any projects supported by donors? If the question is unclear, we can move on to the next one.
I can try
Thank
that
you.
one.
Thank you, Sabrina. The floor is yours.
So I think, yes, and depending on the nature of your project and what you're trying to achieve, I mean, you might determine that you only want to work with farmer organizations that are already at a certain level of professionalism, or you could also use the guidelines to help plan a capacity building intervention or series of interventions for farmer organizations that maybe don't fully meet the standards that are laid out in the guideline. So you could do that either on your own, just using the guidelines as a reference, or you could also employ a formal assessment tool that is itself aligned to the IWA 29, such as the Scope Insight tool that Dieter referenced, or HDIVOCA has what we call M4 tool that is also fairly well aligned with IWA 29. So you can either use an assessment tool that's aligned to the guidelines, or you could just use the guidelines themselves yourself to determine how to sort of do a assessment of sorts of the capacity and see if they meet what you need for your project.
Maybe I could just add one quick comment to that, to Sabrina's. I agree with what Sabrina said, but I'd also like to add that we see the standard as maybe more useful as a guide for continuous improvement. So it allows producer organizations to follow a path towards greater professionalism. So we see it more used as a guide to increase professionalism rather than a standard where you're either in or you're out. But I think people can use the IWA as they choose and as they see fit. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Another question that maybe there isn't an answer to it right now, but I think is a fascinating one is, how can most farmers implement this document since a lot of them are not literate, especially for us in Africa? So perhaps, I don't know, Sabrina, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a challenge. I think, however, most farmer organizations, at least someone probably in management is literate. And so they would be able to help interpret the standards for their farmer organization. Another option would be to look at using a business development service provider or working through a project, in which case that service provider or that project implementer could help interpret the guidelines for the organization. I don't know if other people have other ideas or experience.
Maybe I could add that I think we hope that organizations that use the IWA 29 will develop training materials to help people understand it. And I think those training materials could be pictorial in nature in some cases. So I think there'd be a lot of ways of introducing the standard that could be easier for people to digest than the full standard as it comes straight from ISO. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a very good idea. Now, I'm not sure if we also again have the answer for this one, but again, perhaps someone does. How successful has the IWA been with other donors? The person in question says that they haven't seen much pickup from the International Labor Organization or GIZ sides. So I don't know if you have much experience in this area, but I don't know, Dieter, perhaps you would have something to say on this one?
Yeah, I'm not aware of particular donor organizations that have specified it. I think, you know, when IFC develops its projects, we use IWA aligned training materials and assessment methodologies. So in some sense, we're accepting the IWA without even explicitly saying it, because we've ensured that all the methodologies that we use in the field are aligned to it. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. The remaining questions are more about, you know, things that we can handle offline, and we're a bit behind schedule. So I would just like to, first of all, extend my apologies for all the technical issues that we have faced. This was really unfortunate, but such as the times that we live in right now, this wouldn't happen in face-to-face, but it happens via Zoom. I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you to our panelists for the excellent work. I really appreciate that you took the time to come with us over here today and give your presentations. I think the public really appreciated it. And of course, I would like to thank the public who joined us today, and also our interpreters who made everything run smoothly. So a big thank you to all of you, wishing you all the best. And with this, we will close. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone.